Okay, so I want to start today off talking about something which is not leadership related, but just a conversation I had the other day, and it I thought it was quite interesting, quite fascinating. It was about my theory on evolution and where we're going next. Now, don't get me wrong, this is batshit crazy, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I have a theory. And in this conversation, I'll get to it anyway. So my theory was that I believe one day, because the human brain is so complex, AI will be tasked with mapping the human brain, and I believe AI will be able to do that. So once it's mapped, you would be able to create it digitally, and then you would be able to essentially have a functioning brain, digital functioning brain. So, I mean, you could make it physically, but you could do it digitally. Now, in theory, you could then upload someone's consciousness, but you would have to program the brain to be able to see and be able to hear, and basically have the five senses that we've got, but then also have hormone releases and things like biological urges to still make the brain function as a human brain. So we are driven by our desire to reproduce. Now, men are massively driven to essentially have sex. So when it comes to, if you say to a man, what is the point of you working so hard? Well, to have more money, to increase my status, to become more desirable. Now, he might already be married, but you can't help it. Once you've, once you've, I suppose, once you've got that partner, it's then about comfort and winding down. But when you're young, it is about how to make yourself more desirable. Once that drive is gone, the only other drive really for men is power, which you could say is to do with sex, but generally for men it is sex or power. You still need that driver for sex, otherwise everyone is just going to become completely power obsessed. Now, friend I was chatting to, good friend, he said to me, but that wouldn't work because you can't describe what consciousness is. And I said, well, of course you can. Consciousness is just the brain being on. And he said, well, no, because you don't know what other people experience consciousness as. It's impossible to describe consciousness. He said neurologists for years and years and years, no one has, they're discussing it, and no one has ever been able to describe what consciousness is. So I said to him, no, it's the same as a computer being on. I said, essentially, our brains are very, very complicated synthetic computers. And he said, well, that's ridiculous, because a computer's not self-aware. And I said, but if you programmed it to be self-aware, it would be. And when we're born, we're not functioning humans. It takes us 10, 20 years to be able to function as an adult. So 2 decades. So if you give a computer basic programming and you said to it, all of those experiences you're going to have over 20 years, you're then going to be able to, all of those things are going to decide what your subconscious is, basically how that subconscious then, forms your perception of your own reality. So it tells you how to feel. I mean, if you have two people who grow up in the same area but they have different sets of parents, they're going to be two completely different people because their programming is completely different. Even if they have the same parents but one's older than the other, they've got essentially, I can't remember his name, Gabor, the professor, or the child expert. He says if you've got two siblings, they don't have the same parents as each other, which sounds crazy, but it's true, because the parents treat the elder child differently to how they treat the younger child. If you've got two, they also treat genders differently. So no one has essentially the same parents, unless you're twins, maybe. But even then, twins are different. So everyone's programming determines who they are as a person. You're not born a certain way. Yes, there are certain traits or chemical, some people release more, for example, testosterone than others. Some people have their brains are wired differently, so they're born with their brain isn't quite right. So that's how you end up with people who have severe autism or whatever it may be, and that will shape your perception of reality. And if you aren't that intellectual, you're going to struggle to be self-aware, and that self-awareness is what separates us from dogs, for example. So he was saying, yeah, but that doesn't describe consciousness. He said one of the most fascinating things is when someone goes into a coma, or someone gets put into an induced coma, or you put someone to sleep for an operation. He said, how do you do that? Well, he said that's something that people can't describe, like neurologists don't understand it. And he said, when you dream, he said, how do you describe that? How do you describe what consciousness is? And I said, well, simple. It's so obvious. I said, say you have a computer, and that computer is, let's say it has basic AI on it, and you put it into standby mode, and you manually just go, boop, standby. I said, that's exactly the same as when you're having, say, an operation, and they put you on anaesthetic. I said, all you're doing is you're doing something to a certain part of the brain that makes you go to sleep. That's all you're doing, is playing with a certain part. So neurologists and brain experts, they might not understand the brain perfectly, but they understand how to poke it a bit. Being able to manipulate the brain in certain ways doesn't mean you're let's not literally say there are certain different rules. I said, so let's just say a laptop. A laptop is turn a computer off. And I said, yeah, you can. I said, but if you turn it off, you can never turn it on ever again. Now let's just say laptops, if the rule was that when they were running low on power, they put themselves into standby mode, and that's how they recharged, that's what sleep is. And he was like, well, no, it can't be that he said, but you're experiencing the world and a computer doesn't. And I said, well, that's because we've got our senses. If I took away all 5 of your senses, you're essentially a computer. It's just pitch black. There's nothing there. You can't feel. You imagine, those people who are blind and deaf, and then people sign to them by touch. They communicate with them by touch. But you imagine if you had no touch, no smell, no taste, no hearing, no sight. There's nothing. That's what it would be like for a computer without those 5 things. So if you programmed a robot to be able to sense touch, and to be able to take the molecules that are in the air and then put this is what this smells like. So instead of you actually smelling it, it would tell you. You could essentially program a computer to recognize, like every individual smell gets given a label of this is what it is. Or you actually not, you wouldn't program it because we're programmed through life. I wasn't born knowing what the smell of burning toast smells like, but over time I learnt what that smell is. You know what the smell is of a dirty nappy. I wasn't born knowing that smell. Now I know it. So if you gave a computer ability to smell and have what are they called? Not receptors. When you've got like a bloodhound has like 20,000 or whatever, and we've got, I'm butchering the numbers, let's say 2,000 or 1,000. We can, I know those numbers are way wrong, but we can smell because we've got so many receptors. Let's say you gave a robot the same as that, and then you gave the robot, and essentially, really, you could give a robot better smell. You could give a robot more sensitive touch. You could give a robot better sight, better hearing, so it could hear miles away. If you did that, it would grow up with a completely different perception as to what I had growing up. So if you gave those 5 senses to a robot, and you could, in theory, give it more senses, so you could enable the robot to be able to see in infrared. You could make the robot be able to I don't know. I mean, in theory, let's just forget senses. You could get that robot to be able to receive radio waves, so it could listen to the radio. It could communicate with other robots that are miles away telepathically, because it would just it would have a radio receiver in its head. So you get into a obviously Black Mirror sort of future, but you would be able to create a superhuman, and you'd give it all these different senses and things it could receive and do, and if you programmed it to feel certain emotions and receive hormones as if they were real, so you would give it a virtual hormone gland, it would receive those hormones, and then it would kind of, you could program it to go through puberty and what it feels like in puberty and all these different things to make it more to make it experience what a human does. But then some might say that that's inferior. Would you want sleep? Would you want to lose a third of your life to sleep if you didn't have to? Would you want to behave like an animal around, if you were a young man, around women? Or would you want to be able to switch that off or tone it down and just kind of go, nah, you know, if you didn't need to reproduce, is that a waste of time? If you could just make another one, just design a baby and kind of go, right, let's have it look like this, and then it's going to be more prone to this, and you know, I know it sounds insane, but that's eventually where you could go if you could map the brain. Now, going back to what he was saying again, he was like, my friend about consciousness, he was like, you can't say that you understand, you can't just say that you understand consciousness when no one's ever been able to describe it. And I said, but it's not hard. It's really not hard. Consciousness is your brain firing and being aware of what is around it with the senses. And if you turn those senses off in the brain, there's nothing there. And if you did that from day one, you wouldn't be able to learn anything because there's no input. There would just be nothing. And that's what a computer is. You give a computer the ability to be able to see the world around it, feel the world around it, hear the world around it, it will learn. Obviously, if you had a much more complex computer and had basic AI, again, it would then be able to connect to the internet and be able to do calculations instantly. You know, we're starting to get crazy again. But so anyway, he said to me, what makes you think you can understand neurology and all these neuroscientists can't? And I said, here's the thing. I don't study neurology. Now, if I did, I would be 10 steps down the rabbit hole. And I said to him, here's the thing. If I studied neurology and let's compare it to the White House. And someone said to me, how big's the White House? And I was already 10 steps down say I'm in the 10 steps into the foyer, the entrance lobby, and it's huge. And someone says to me, how big is it? I don't know. I could make an educated guess because of how high the ceilings are, how big the room is, how posh the decor is. I could use a lot of the signals in that room to give me a rough idea. This is going to be quite a big house, but I'd probably be way off. Now, let's say instead of being inside the entrance lobby or foyer or whatever, you were 100 steps back on the grass out the front looking at the White House. And someone said to me, how big is it? Well, I've got a much better perception of how big it is because I'm not inside it. So sometimes not knowing all the details means you can see the bigger picture more easily. So I said to him, look at a computer from a very logical, big picture point of view and compare it to the human brain, and you will see that the human brain is essentially a very sophisticated computer. That's it. It's not complicated. And he couldn't get his head around it. He was just like, but it has to be more complicated than that. And I said, it's not. You turn it off, you stop the electric, going to it, it's gone. Same with a laptop. Now you look at a laptop when it gets old and all the parts inside it start what's the word? They just start, the actual physical things inside it start degrading, let's just say, and then you start getting problems with your computer. That's exactly like old age. It's just what happens in your brain. Now, if it was digital, that would never happen. It wouldn't, because you'd just be able to transport it and again and again and again. Now, here's what I said to him, where it goes a little bit mental, is I said to him, let's just say it was someone like Elon Musk, who got to the end of his life and he said, well, I've mapped the brain. We need a guinea pig. Do you know what? I'd love to live forever. Let's do it. And he put himself into, someone with that sort of brain power as well, put himself into this digital brain. And he had a robotic body, and he thought, well, I can make myself as strong as I want, intelligent as I want. I can make my eyesight as good as I want. And then he says to himself, oh, do you know what? Desiring the opposite sex is a waste of time for me, so I'm going to switch it off. What does he want now? Well, there's only two things that people want, sex and power. So now he only wants power. How dangerous is this getting now? So he wants power. So what does he do? He says, do you know what? This sleep isn't efficient. It isn't efficient use of my time. So I'm going to switch off my sleep. What else? Eating, not efficient. Get rid of that. Emotions, they're weakness. So we're going to switch off emotions. And then very slowly, let's call it Robot Elon, slowly becomes a robot with no emotions, pure logic. No humanity, no compassion. It just ends up being purely logic. And then in that logical kind of insanity, he then says, well, do you know what the biggest weakness is? Or the biggest threat to me? Someone else getting what I've got. So I'm going to stop anyone else being able to get transported into a brain, digital brain like me. So he then switches off the ability. Then he realizes the biggest threat to me is humanity, because when humanity figures out how powerful I am, they're going to be afraid of me and they're going to turn me off. So what's he going to do? He's probably going to turn humanity against itself, or he's going to destroy humanity. He'll put himself in some digital brain way under the ground, know that radiation can't affect him, and then cause some nuclear disaster and kill everyone. I know we're going way off track now, but I think that if that happened, that's where evolution would go. You'd end up with one insane, super advanced, super clever person. And even if, let's just say, they did 10 at once, I've got a feeling that what would happen is they'd end up like the Borg in Star Trek, where they can communicate, they would all switch off. Because if they all switch off their emotions and they all switch off their anything that makes them human, they will all end up thinking as one mind. So it's basically the beginning of the Borg, where everyone is just assimilation, where they're just going to go and, with just complete power, go and take over the planet, and then any other planet. They'll just be able to send off versions of themselves around the universe just to take over everything. I've gone a little bit far down the rabbit hole, but that's where I went with this. But going back to the whole consciousness thing, he couldn't get his head around how I thought it was so simple, consciousness. But that's what I believe it is. I believe that we are just a complicated supercomputer. When you've mapped the brain, you will be able to understand that it literally is a complicated computer that has a lot of programs that make up who you are. So your memory is one type of aspect of your brain. Your senses are your input. You have your let's say your things like when you go to sleep and you dream, that's like the computer being in standby mode and things still ticking over. The fact that your brain is programmed to keep all your organs running without you thinking about it, that's what computers do. You think when you put a computer in standby mode, you open it up, you don't need to load Windows back up again. It's already on there. So essentially, that's all it is. Yeah, got nothing to do with leadership whatsoever, but just thought I'd share that. Back onto leadership, there was something I did want to talk about, which is, at the moment, I'm finding it super fascinating, and I'm going to cover this in a few more podcasts coming up. But what I want to talk about is the British election. Now, I've spoken about this previously, where I've said about leaders and followers, and it's not about, I mean, for some people it's about who you support, and they never change team. Like if you support Everton, and your mate supports Man City, if loyalty wasn't a thing, you would just support the team that's winning because it's more enjoyable to watch them. But the loyalty for some people, it just stays with them forever, and then they just will support that team forever, and no matter how hard times are and how unsuccessful their team might be, they will still always support them because of who they are. Now, some people are like that with their political party that they follow. So if they've always followed Labour, their parents followed Labour, and then they will follow Labour forever because it's always been Labour is working class. So working class people, oh no, we wouldn't vote Conservative. So there's a bit of that in there. Now, that was how it was to begin with. Now, the reason it was like that wasn't because of the person who was leading. They would follow that person regardless because of what the party stood for. So Labour was always known as representative of the working man, the working class people, and Conservatives looked after the more bourgeois, middle class, the hofty-tofties. That was more what the Conservatives represented, and those were the people that kind of voted for that party. Now, here's the thing. As time has gone on, people are more inclined to vote for who benefits them the most, which is what I said about leadership previously. It's not about who's in charge. You could put, like they did when Ali G was in Parliament, you could have literally Ali G in charge. And if Ali G legitimately was saying, I'm going to bring taxes down, I'm going to 15%, and I'm going to give first-time buyers half of the deposit for their homes, and I'm going to make half the waiting times in the NHS, and I'm going to increase the defence budget, and I'm going to, all this bullshit, and then said, and I know where I'm going to get it from because this is what blah, 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 blah. And they promised the world, and everyone thought, oh, that benefits me. That is then, all these people would then follow Ali G because they go, well, that actually sounds good to me because it benefits me and my life. So they would follow that person, which is why when Labour used to say, we're going to do stuff to represent or look after the little guy, look after the working class man, the working class people said, well, that's who we want to follow because Labour are going to help us. Awesome. But then the Conservatives would say, well, we want to help out business people and we want to help out the middle class. So the Conservatives would then get that vote. Now, if with this whole followership and leadership debate now, if you look at the people in charge, you'd think, well, I don't want to vote for any of them. They're both a bunch of muppets. They are horrendous. The actual physical leaders, most people wouldn't follow, trust, anything. So it's not about that. It's more about what the party are going to do that will benefit the individual or voter the most. So if, for example, you are in a certain age group and you can't get on the property ladder and you can't, let's just say your taxes are really high, you can't afford, your fuel bills are really high. I think the UK's energy bills are like some of the highest in Europe. So, say you're in that certain age group and you just can't afford anything and you're just screwed and Labour are promising you the world, most people are going to vote for Labour because it's what benefits them. Then say if you have the Conservatives who are saying they're going to look after all the baby boomers who've got tons of money in their houses, and Conservatives say, well, we're going to reduce inheritance tax. So we're going to increase working tax and reduce inheritance tax. You're now favouring the pensioners. Or we're going to up pensioners and then possibly reduce immigration. So now you're gaining the old vote. And there's a lot of old people. So in reality, the way to win a political vote is to look at the demographic of how many people from each demographic vote, and then say, okay, cool, that's the demographic we're going to aim for. So we're going to aim for the people, say, between 20 and 30, if they all vote, and we're going to tell them what they want to hear, and then we're going to get their vote, and we're going to promise them it, and probably never deliver it. But the point is, you're going to, and it's difficult for the party that are in charge at the moment, because people will judge them on their performance now, whereas no one can judge Labour on their performance at the moment because they're not in. But they can promise the world. So if anything, it's an advantage for Labour because they can lie about what they would have done in the last 4 years, or embellish. We would have done this, and we wouldn't have put the country into such hard times and whatever else. So essentially, winning that election is about selling the party to the demographics that vote the most. So you could be very tactical about this, which I don't think many of these parties are. They're really not. They're not as clever as they think they are. Now, here's something else super, super interesting, which the Americans are very good at, much better than the British. The person you put in charge should be the person who appeals to your chosen demographic the most. Someone who is charming. You look at the American people who win, your Bill Clintons, your Barack Obamas, those sort of people. They're very charming. They're very cool and calm and collected, and people love them. And obviously Barack being mixed race, everyone, he got all the black vote because they loved the fact that he had one of his parents was black. So they were like, oh, brilliant, or African American sort of thing. He was half African American, so everyone wanted to vote for him. The UK, if you look at the demographics, and you've got Rishi Sunak in charge. Now, Rishi Sunak didn't get voted in. The Conservatives are missing a bit of a trick here. It's all good them saying, oh, we're going to put someone in who is of a minority, which makes us look like we're very multicultural and we're accepting of other ethnicities. Here's the problem with that. There are still, probably for the next 20 years, there are a lot of very, very, a lot of racist people in the country, like deep down racist, not on the surface racist. Because if you look at the Brexit vote, when that was being talked about, there was a hell of a lot of, let's kick all the foreigners out. People just coming out of the woodwork going, yeah, all the pitchforks came out as soon as there was a Brexit vote. It was really strange just seeing these people who were really sweet and nice, and as soon as there was a chance to, put the white hood back on and go and chase the Africans down the road and string them up, those people were they just came out of the woodwork and went mad for it again. Confederate flags, essentially, there may as well have been Confederate flags everywhere. So, if you look at the fact that the country is probably a lot more racist than it thinks it is, and the country is, and I think the last time I saw it was 86% white British, 14% other. Here's the thing. Why would you have someone in charge who is a different ethnicity until that racism has gone down? If you didn't win the Brexit vote, or the Brexit, not win, but if the British people voted to come out of Europe because of foreigners, and that was the biggest thing for them, immigration, and then Rishi Sunak, with his chocolate skin, is stood there saying, we're going to do what we can against immigration. You kind of think, do you not know that you're, within the last 2 generations, your ancestors were immigrants as well? So the Conservatives have, I believe, fucked up because they've put a brown person in charge, and the country will not have that, which is why they loved Boris. He was very, very British. So I think the Conservatives, with Rishi in charge, are pretty fucked. Now, the Mayor of London got voted in because it is so heavily multicultural. So he's Asian, but he got in because I don't know what the percentages are there, but if that represented the whole of the country, then I would say, yeah, put someone brown in charge. But I believe Rishi being in charge is a very, very, very stupid way quick way of getting yourself kicked out of being in number 10, or winning the vote. So I think they've missed a trick there, and they probably pay people a lot of money to see these sort of things. So I don't know why they've done it. I think it's stupid. You should have, if anything, I think they've got until March next year to do their compulsory election. So what you probably should have done is change leader now, put someone, sounds harsh, but put someone white in who's very British, not Nigel Farage, but someone of that ilk, someone like your Tony Blair's, or just someone very Jimmy Carr-esque, very middle class white British, looks like a businessman. If you'd have put, looks like an accountant basically. If you'd have put someone like that in charge and then said we're doing an election, you would probably win again. Having someone brown in charge, you're not going to win. You're not going to win. You're not. Now, they did in America because they're incredibly more woke. And I say that because the country is so young. It doesn't have the history of Britain. It doesn't have the... It does have the racism, but not the same as the British. There are a small proportion of people in America who are, because of the... I mean, it is very multicultural, as in, even with the Irish were treated like shit. The Italians were treated like shit. So there's a big kind of representation of different people who are treated really badly. So that they're all going to kind of vote for the little guy, the brown one, essentially, because it's someone different. Now, in the UK, racism is a lot more discreet. It's not... You don't literally have people in white hoods running around setting people on, stringing them up, setting them on fire. You don't have that in the UK. Everything is a lot more clandestine, a lot more kind of behind the curtains. Very, what do you call it? And I've heard a lot of people say it. It's racist without knowing it's racist, and very subtly. So, whereas the Americans are either not racist or they're very obviously racist. So that's kind of the difference. But I want to talk about this a lot more, the politics. I'm going to watch a lot more of the debates and talk about it again a bit more. But I just think the Conservatives are fucked up having Rishi in charge. And I do believe that it is about, probably now, how much Labour can... Because they are probably the most hippie. They are very hippie. And it's how much can they sell themselves to the woke generation, I think. And the biggest, another massive fuck up that the Tories did is, maybe they've done this for a reason. They stopped people without photo ID being able to vote, which means all the old racists won't be able to vote. So they won't be able to vote against Rishi. I don't know. I think the Conservatives have screwed themselves. But yeah, I'm gonna watch some more, and I'm gonna compare it to... I'm gonna do quite a bit of work on the whole leadership, followership / voting scenario. Like I said, I've said previously, there's many different types of being put in charge. There is the people who stand for something and everyone chooses to follow them, so they just end up in charge. There are the people who put themselves in charge and no one stands up to them. There are the people who are voted in by everyone else, so popularity contest. And then you got the ones who are voted in by by people from above. So in like a managerial sort of position where you get promotion. So Rishi wasn't voted in by the people, he was voted in by the party. So the Conservatives picked him, the people didn't. So now the people need to pick who they like. And this is where it's a completely different style of voting. One is from your peers, and the other one. So you've got peer voting, you've got promotion from above. So if you were a manager and now you're getting promoted to a senior manager, let's say in a business, and then you've got promoting from let's call it promotion from below, which is two politicians and society's voting which one gets in. Yeah, I'm going to leave it there. The next few weeks are going to be fascinating, so I'm probably going to be covering this quite a bit. Yeah, let me know what you think. I'd love to hear from anyone and their opinion on either of the topics I've covered. My kind of off my tits version of what the future's going to be, and basically robots coming to kill us all, and then also my theory on the politics at the moment and the voting. And yeah, I really want to hear what people have got to think, and I want to get some sort of, like I said, more information over the next few weeks, and then I'm going to cover it a lot more. But I'm finding it fascinating at the moment, and we'll see. We'll see what's going to happen. So, yeah, I'll speak to you soon, and thank you again, and have a good week.